All right, in our second video in social class, it should be a little bit shorter. We're going to be thinking about different ways of thinking about what class is. We kind of talked about one in the last video, and we're going to focus in a bit more on that in this video, and also think about a different way of thinking about class. So in the last video, we talked about these modes of production, and we focused a lot on like how people made things and met their needs and stuff. This is the Marxian view, or coming from Karl Marx, in which class is seen as, or understood through the lens of relations of production. For Marx, human beings fundamentally are productive creatures. We create everything we need. And if you think about it, that's a fairly simple and true statement. We don't find everything we need. Maybe we find a honeysuckle on a bush and we get something out of that. But by and large, we create everything we need. And that's crucial for Marx. It's actually defining of who people are. And that's why he focuses so much on production. How do we make what we need? How do we get what we need on a daily basis? So for him, the fundamental question is who works and who doesn't. Right? Who really makes what we need, and who owns the business or those means of making what we need. And we can look at different class relations throughout history. So we talked about in feudal times. If we look at the beginning of the United States, we see the slave class relation, for example. Again, here we have the owner of the means of production. It wouldn't be a capitalist in this instance. It would be more of a feudal relation. The person who owns the land, the landlord, and they also own the slaves, so the slave owners. And then you have the direct producers, so the workers, the slaves. The wealth and well-being of the slave owners depends on how productive those slaves are. There's a couple things that are critical about understanding this that become a little bit more clear when we think about slaves, though it's really true of any class relation for Marx, is that this is an inverse relationship. The harder the slave works, the better the slave owner does. The less the slave works, the less they make for the slave owner. So the better the ruling class or the owning class does, the worse off the working class does. So slaves were very aware of this. Many workers are very aware of this too. So this is a direct relation between classes, and that's why Marx calls them the relations of production, and why he focuses on both capitalists and workers, landlords and peasants. The way we're used to thinking about class or social class comes from Max Weber. For Weber, he's not necessarily as focused on class relations of exploitation, but it's more of an individual category. Where do I fit in terms of what he calls market position? And in any situation, how much does my prestige, my wealth, my money, how much does that get me in any transaction? It's not just about economics, it's about prestige, property, and power. Right? So maybe I don't, make a ton of money, but having that, professor or doctor by my name might open some doors for me that it might not for other people who just have an MA. Right? So that gives me a little more prestige, and that gets me things in certain transactions. So here we focus a little bit more on income. We can think about skills and skill scarcity. If I want to go apply for a job, how useful are the skills that I have? Does that give me more bargaining power? Importantly for Weber, this is mostly limited to capitalist societies. He doesn't think class is as important in feudal society. There it's more about family, authority structure. Class kind of goes by the wayside because capitalist societies are market societies. And so in market societies, market position becomes more important. This is different from Marx. So what might this model look like? We'll look at a visual representation. For Marx, it's again, what is your relationship to the means of production? Here we can think of like relationship to the corporation or the business itself. Do you own it and control it? Are you a high-level manager, or even like the Walton family who owns Walmart? They don't have to work for a wage. Those people don't, bless their hearts. So you have the owners and controllers of the means of production. In our society, this is capitalists, but we also talked about landlords, slave owners, who own the means of production, which is the land. And then you have workers. In our society, this is a wage laborer. We work for a wage. I'm a fancy wage laborer. I wish I got a higher wage, but I get a paycheck. I don't own the university or the college that I work for. Somewhere in between there, we have small business owners. They may own a business but don't really employ people, what Marx called the petty bourgeoisie, who aren't really, full capitalists who are very much fetishized by our politicians. And again, what we want to think about here is the relation between these groups for Marx. As a wage laborer, I'm dependent on the capitalist to get my wage, which I need to get everything I need. The capitalist is dependent on me to make a profit. Without workers, capitalists can't exist. But Marx interestingly asks, can workers exist without capitalists? Mm-hmm. Right, for Weber, it's different. Social classes, like, where are you individually in the world? How much income do you make? Are you kind of prestigious? What's your education level? These can all open doors for you, right? So are you in the middle class area? Are you in the lower middle class? Again, it's an individual quality. We're not thinking about relationships between groups. And both of these are useful. If we want to explain poverty, or we want to think about why are people working during the pandemic and going into grocery stores and hiring in grocery stores, well, it's about their market position. If they're in the lower class, they make less than $30,000 a year. They need to make money. They can't afford to not make money. When we think about if they are going to offer unemployment benefits, that also has to do with individual market position. They're thinking about lowering those in order to put people in a position that they have to go back to work. This is more visually represented, a fairly famous anti-capitalist poster over here. But I want you to focus more on the right here about how we break down these different classes in Weberian terms. On the left of that diagram, we see how powerful are they? Are they professionals, CEOs, or politicians? How much money do they make, and what kind of degree do they have? So CEOs and politicians, they control businesses, they control the government. That's a lot of power. They usually make a fair amount of money. But in the upper middle class, we have professionals, lower and upper middle class, depending on how much money you make, what degree you have. Often those things are directly related. And what we're thinking about here is power and control over our work. I work at my own pace. I choose how much of my class is going to be videos and how much is going to be synchronous in person. That's my professional decision. Though some would probably try to take it away from me. And all of these things can, again, open different doors for you. If you're in a situation in which you're in a market position, right? If you're making a transaction for something, all of these aspects can be important. If you have more power and professional control, well, that makes you, means you can demand more salary, for example. That's a market position. If you have a higher salary, you can get a house, for example. One of the things we want to think about in a capitalist society is what are the limits to growth? Capitalism roughly starts in the 1600s. Industrial capitalism, we see this incredible growth in productivity. We're looking at gross domestic product and the overall growth. But can we grow indefinitely? Capitalist societies are dependent on growth, but is that sustainable? Something we'll come back to. In the next video, we're going to look at some trends in capitalist development.